Thank you very much for the invitation. Especially, I would like to thank the Cyprus authorities, the Cyprus Institute, Open Forum Europe. I think it's very nice that you organize your conferences also together with the EU presidencies, because it's an opportunity not only to speak about open source and about the merits of this technology, but it's also an opportunity to link with the local communities. Because I think open source is more than just a choice. It's also almost a fact of life. It's a choice about how you relate with your fellow developers, how you build ecosystems. And I would start by saying what a difference a year made. Because more or less 1 year ago, I was addressing a similar audience of programmers and open source activists even. And I was telling them, look, you know, we have a problem that open source somehow in policy making has a strange image. You know, some people don't take it seriously. Some people think AI is just, you know, a bunch of, people who are doing this in their spare time. Open source is not necessarily that reliable. It's never going to be something that large companies take very, very seriously. And in my speech, I was telling them that we needed to fight this perception, because it's actually factually not correct. Today, the world runs on open source. 80% of all software is based on open source. We may not see it, and the reason is that in Europe we maybe have been too, how could I say, we've been doing it, the development, but we've not organized ourselves to reap the benefits out of open source development. Today, open source is controlled by a few foundations that are not owned or controlled by Europe, most of them. And there are something like 3 million programmers in the EU that are contributing to the development of code. You may not know them, but they are doing essential work for a lot of the software we are using. So what I was saying 1 year ago is that maybe we need a strategy. Maybe we need to put open source on the map of policymakers. And that's why I'm really happy to be here with you today, 1 year later, because we've delivered an EU open source strategy. And what is interesting is that it is centerpiece in our tech sovereignty package, because as was already said, it's not just a choice in terms of how you develop the technology. It's a choice about freedom. It's a choice about, are you just buying technology or are you making technology? And that's very much the message also of our strategy. Is first to say, we have potential in Europe about this open source. We have the potential to make it not just a sideshow, we have the potential to make it the main show of how we develop technologies. And I think that's something that we should not underestimate. Linking the communities is very much the essence of the European Union. We don't have hyperscalers in Europe, but we have communities that work with standards, that work with open source, with open specifications. And together, we are actually very, very strong when we bring this in terms of the communities. And what is also nice is that we are actually open to the world. And I think it's great to see Switzerland. I think you are doing quite a lot of good stuff on innovation, and I think ranking very, very high. We have also good member states that are doing well across the EU, but I think the strength is also in our diversity, in the sectors that we represent in Europe. We have everything that we need, we just need to pull it together. And that's what this strategy is trying to do. We have 4 priorities, essentially. The first one is to say, let's use open source for sovereignty. So we did a kind of analysis to find out that indeed, we have some strength. There are areas in terms of European technology where we already have the building blocks. It is in areas like, cloud infrastructure, in some of the software elements. We have also gaps, specifically, for instance, operating systems. We don't have any made in Europe. We have gaps in terms of some of the AI developments and advanced software. The few days ago, the fact that, Anthropic decided not to distribute anymore its software means basically we don't have any alternative in Europe. Maybe we should use the supercomputers we are developing to actually train models and have also the best algorithm in the world. But today it's not the case. So what we are saying in the first pillar of the strategy is, let's use the open source we already have, so adopt it, use it, deploy it. And here we are counting also on good work and collaboration with the member states. Very recently, a structure was created. It's called the Digital Commons European Digital Infrastructures. It's based in Paris, and with already 8 member states have joined. The purpose of this vehicle is actually to host some of the coding and to actually spread it, to show that it can be tested and adopted by governments, but also by communities more generally. So that's the first element. Use what we have and use open source to develop what we miss. And in that context, we have also in the tech sovereignty package proposed the Cloud and AI Development Act, where we flag funding opportunities, where precisely open source will be an instrument so that Europe has a full cloud and AI stack. And this is very important, and we see open source as a key ingredient here. The second pillar is very much about making sure that we develop the communities. We develop also open source as a solution which is embedded, but also which is thriving because it is based on communities that are funded properly, because also it can be sustainable. And too often that's the problem we found out. We did a consultation earlier this year, very successful. A lot of replies, more than 1,600 people replied to the public consultation, and all of them were pointing at this problem that, it's good to develop open source code, it's even better if you maintain it over time. But who is doing that? Very often we found out that this is about volunteers. It's about people who have maybe another job and are doing this, almost in their spare time, maintaining the code, fixing the bugs, improving it. We need to bring more money to this activity, and that's what Europe is committing to. We will launch a facility to maintain open source code in the future and put some EU funding in this area. We also found that too often we miss foundations to organize and host and make sure that the communities also not only interact, but make sure that they have some control on the code. Because it's nice when you have open source, you can play with it, you can do something with it, you can develop it. But if the foundation is controlled by somebody else outside of Europe, from one day to the next, it may be taken out. This is what happened actually recently to some countries. They could not access anymore GitHub. This is what happened a few years back when OpenAI decided to go proprietary, and from one day to the next, you could not access the code anymore. So what we are calling for is also in Europe to make sure that we don't only have the developers, we don't only have the good code, we also have the governance to make sure that it remains accessible and that for the future it will be also an opportunity that is maintained but also that is credible as an alternative. And in addition, we want to make sure that the companies that use open source have a good business model, because if it's free, you may wonder, how do I make money with this? Of course, open source is not really for free. It is actually based on services that you provide around or on models that are maybe free until it becomes, with additional features that you pay for. That's very important. If we want a thriving ecosystem, it needs to be funded, and this cannot only come from the public sector. So again, we will try to use our startup fund, for instance, startup and scale-up fund, to make sure that open source is also a valid business. And in this pillar also what we want to make sure is that security is also very much in the genetics of open source, because to tell you the truth, when I was proposing, some very, positive element on open source, the message I got back, from various stakeholders is, open source maybe is not so good for cybersecurity. If you have it open, somebody will read the code, they will find the bugs, they will exploit it, so it's not so good. Actually, that's probably the reverse that we should explain. If it's open, it means that people can check it, people can verify it. You can use AI actually to verify it very thoroughly. And in the end, if you have an open source software, it can be better in terms of cybersecurity. That's actually what the Cyber Resilience Act recognizes, when it says that if you use open source, you escape some elements in terms of the risk assessment in the regulation. But this is really a collective effort. We cannot stand still and wait for people to say that open source is not cyber secure, especially in these days where you are facing very rapid use of any fault, any bugs in the software. So that's really a call for action, and that's what the strategy also is pointing out. The last two pillars are also very important because they are about the uptake of open source. First, we want to make the public sector a place where open source is thriving. Today, when I go around Europe, I meet many municipalities, many regions who tell me very proudly, I'm not using anymore some of these hyperscaler solutions. I'm developing some open source. That's very nice. But if you do this bottom-up small scale, it means that you reinvent the wheel all the time. What we want to do in Europe is actually to build a system whereby we bid on open source, but we actually pool our efforts together so that we have solutions that are really competitive, that you can transfer from one member state to the next, from one municipality to the other. So what we propose is to have really a catalog of solutions, whereby the public sector, when they use open source, and public money, public code, I think is a great principle, will actually put the results in a common repository so that we find out about it. We can use it again. And in the same vein, what we want to make sure is that we improve the public procurement altogether. What we found is that too often the public sector doesn't know how to procure open source solutions. They are a bit worried that it's too complicated. They don't have necessarily the skilled people inside the government to make sure that they know how to use it, they implement it properly. What we are proposing is first to make sure that we improve the way you procure, so that we provide guidance, guidelines, learning, so that the public sector knows how to use open source in their tendering. But secondly, we want to develop what we call the OSPO, these offices for open source, where governments around Europe can again develop these capacities so that they know how to use open source and they build a network between them and develop their skills and competencies. This, we believe, will be a very positive element, and it will make open source not only, as I was saying earlier, a sideshow, but something that governments bid upon and really develop positively in the future. And last but not least, we want to make sure that open source get credentials, not only in the governments, not only in terms of adoption in society, but also in terms of a recognized contribution in standardization and also internationally. In Europe, we have this approach that we want to develop a tech offer. We want to work internationally, not only with Switzerland, but actually with countries in the developing world, in our neighborhood. And open source is great for this, because actually, if it is for sovereignty in Europe, it can be for sovereignty everywhere. It's something you can share. And I've had very interesting conversation with ministries, in Kenya, in Latin America, where they are looking at Europe as a source of code, but also as a source of inspiration for developing their own ecosystems locally, appropriating the technology, and also making sure that we share the results and the experience. And I think this is a very positive message, because we can share not only about how we do things, we can share about the solutions to deliver on the ground in these various countries internationally. So overall, as I said, what a difference a year made. We started from basically a challenge to today having a plan, and today having a new challenge, which is about how to execute it, how to deliver really on these elements. We will have, through the Cloud and AI Development Act, I think, an opportunity to put in legislation these principles that, when you spend money, you should consider open source. And also, when you use it, you should make it available to others. We have the opportunity also to make sure that through open source, we develop new communities, new solutions. But at the end of the day, this will require to convince people to buy and to use open source even more, because I think this is just the first step. And let's not fool ourselves. The perception is still that, some other software that are proprietary are easier to use. are just coming your way with the back office and the support staff. So it's not an easy journey, and I think we will need to be very resilient, but also very determined if we want to make open source really a mainstream solution for our tech sovereignty. But there is no alternative. I think this is really the moment of truth. I'm not sure we should thank Donald Trump necessarily, but definitely what we should do is also look at ourselves in the mirror. If we are not seizing the opportunity today, we will have only ourselves to blame. So my call today is to say that we have the strategy, we have the community, let's get organized, and in 1 year time I want to come back and make sure that I can say we did it. Thank you.